Today, what I'm reading is a book by a Russian partisan, and it is appropriately titled Red Partisan, the Memoir of a Soviet Resistance Fighter on the Eastern Front by Nikolai Obryn'ba. This is an unusual book. Obryn'ba was not your typical soldier. He was an artist, and he volunteered at the very beginning of the war and ended up fighting with the Home Guard rather than the Red Army in a unit that was encircled soon after at Vyazma, and so he became a prisoner of war. He was able eventually to escape, and after that he joined the Partisans. So his book is about half about his POW time and about half about his time with the Partisans. Because he was not a natural soldier, he found these things quite difficult. He had to do things like kill collaborators and other actions that the Partisans undertook, and he wrote very frankly about the effect this had on his psyche. But it's quite interesting. He does get into things that a lot of other people do not. There's some controversy about his book as well because it was put together after his death by people who worked with his widow, and so some people think that she did too much of the writing. Other people say that she just wrote down everything that he had said for years and years, and that it was confirmed with other people who could say that the various events and places were accurate. So just bear that in mind. It's got that extra layer, which many memoirs have anyway, of time passing and editing. But knowing that, you can still take a lot away from this book. The chapters are interesting. I think they have some creative chapter titles here. Let me share a couple of those with you. Chapters like Remains of a Soldier, Dante's Description of Hell, A Handful of Cottage Cheese, Soul of a Jackal, Victim of the Mad Lance Corporal, and Tobacco and Hot Bodies. So quite interesting, very personal, and worth, I think, a lot of people's time to read. I want to share with you just a couple of brief passages here. One, he writes about having to kill a collaborator. And he says, yes, those were evil times and difficult choices had to be made. That's why when the life of the Partisans is described as some kind of picnic in the forest, it's a gross mistake. Every moment was coupled with risk, every step a struggle to stand up for oneself and keep a clear conscience. Any compromise could lie upon one's whole life like a grave sin, a millstone hanging round one's neck. I behaved with some bravado after killing that polizei, but I couldn't close my eyes to sleep, for I dreamed of blood. Such was the autumn of 1942 for me when I joined the Partisans. Another thing I thought was interesting, another little tidbit from another spot in the book, and bear this in mind when you look at photos of the war, and especially if you're interested in women in the Partisans. He writes that Partisans often displayed a craving for pre-war things, mundane things, anything that reminded them of a time unburdened by war, and many of their deeds, which may seem naive and funny, become understandable when we remember this. For example, when I photographed the female partisans of our women's platoon, they would wear their carefully preserved blouses and skirts instead of a fighter's uniform with firearms. Now that tells us a lot because there are people who look at these photos and sometimes see women, both soldiers and partisans, who don't look like soldiers to them, who are dressed in their skirts. And women often did wear skirts at that time, and sometimes they didn't have pants to put on. But he clearly says here that these women had uniforms and weapons, but in this picture, which was a rare thing, they wanted to look more like their pre-war selves. So just an interesting note to bear in mind when you see these kinds of photos. One other thing I wanted to mention about this book, if you look closely at the cover here, there's a dog that looks a lot like a German Shepherd, and those who know me know that German Shepherds are my favorite dogs. So there are dogs in the book, and another thing that makes it worth reading. So that's it. That's my quick review of Red Partisan by Nikolai Obryn'ba. I think it is worth your time and worth reading with those couple of caveats, but they're pretty much the same caveats as for any memoir. I hope you enjoy it or find a similar book that you enjoy.